Hey everybody, Some Gadget Guy here, and I'm at the Casey and Sayer Studios in sunny Southern California, and they were kind enough to hook me up with an AT&T Galaxy S5 to review, spend some time with, shoot some video, take some pics, and walk you around all of the features of Samsung's newest premier flagship smartphone. Now, before I even get into the review, let's just get one thing out in the air here. This is going to be one of the top, if not the top selling phone of this generation this year. Okay, and if it doesn't win, it's going to take the lion's share of the Android ecosystem sales and duke it out with whatever Apple has up its sleeve for the next iPhone. But the point I'm trying to make is regardless of any of the criticisms I'm about to levy at this phone, it is a top-notch premier experience. And if you were thinking about shopping one, you're probably gonna like it. If you're coming from another Samsung device, you're probably gonna like it. If you're coming from any other Android phone, you're probably gonna like it. And it just further reinforces my assertion that the premier end of the smartphone market is maturing and starting to plateau. Because the criticisms that we're going to levy a device like this, the HTC One M8, the LG G2, the Nokia Lumia Icon, and Lumia 930, we're getting into finer and finer degrees of minutia in comparing these various devices. If it's a flagship phone these days, chances are it's probably really good. But now that I've gotten that disclaimer out of the way, let's talk about the Galaxy S5. Jumping into the hardware and design aesthetic, Samsung is becoming a victim of their own success. The build of the Galaxy S5 isn't going to shock or surprise anybody in this day and age. It's very similar to the Galaxy S4, and it's still pretty similar to the Galaxy S3. It's a very consistent design language, and they're not taking any risks with their flagship device on the Galaxy S5. Walking around the phone, here's the 5.1-inch screen. It's really remarkable how good a job Samsung and LG have done at making over 5-inch screens seem reasonable. I mean, it was only a couple years ago that the Galaxy Note came out with a 5.3-inch screen, and now over 5 inches is sort of a normal size compared to some of our humongous phablets. So it's hard for me to show this on camera, but we have this little sort of dotted effect. It's almost like a Liechtenstein artistic effect going around the front face, which lines up well with the back plates, sort of textured, soft touch plastic. I'm so happy to see Samsung walk away from glossy plastic for their backplates. I think that makes phones look cheap, and this I think looks a lot better. Now, we've joked about the sort of Band-Aid effect on the backplate of the Galaxy S5. I've joked about the backplate on the Galaxy S5, but it's one of those things where this phone doesn't really photograph well. As much as I've been trying to set up shots that make this phone look attractive and trying to zoom in close to show you different aspects of the phone, this looks so much better in person than it does in press photos or on video. And so for all of my hand-wringing about how much I didn't necessarily love the iteration design of the Galaxy S4 to the Galaxy S5. The Galaxy S5 in person, I am liking the look and the feel of the phone in my hand better than the Galaxy S4. And that's a pretty tall order because the Galaxy S4 was a phenomenal phone. And I think the Galaxy S5 has definitely stepped away from some of the things that I didn't like about the S4's design. It looks much better in real life than it does on your computer monitor. And you'll unfortunately just kind of have to take my word for that. And while it doesn't quite get us to the uber modern aesthetic on the Lumia Icon and Lumia 930, I at least find this to be more attractive than the Galaxy S4, so already that's a step up over its predecessor. Very subtle AT&T branding right here. None of the big, ugly, obnoxious check marks that you see on a Verizon phone. Sorry, I had to get that dig in. And we've got a little speaker on the back here. There's the little notch on the side of this edge right here so that we can pull the back plate off. To showcase my assertion that a lot of the changes to the Galaxy lineup are more than skin deep, are under all of this sort of soft touch plastic surface, we see a very different battery compartment than we've seen on any other Galaxy phone before. So this 2800 milliamp hour battery is a lot narrower, but is a little thicker than some of the other cells, and it's a very high capacity. It's a very dense cell. This is one of the heaviest batteries I've ever pulled out of a phone. And I'm really glad that Samsung is still allowing us to get to the battery, but this is probably one of the reasons why Samsung outfitted this with a 2800 milliamp hour cell as opposed to the G2's 3000 milliamp hour battery, is just building in the extra material and the ability to remove the backplate. Probably that's the compromise we're gonna have to make, is that last 200 milliamp hours just at the very tail end of the battery. And I know for a lot of people, if that's a compromise you have to make for being able to replace the battery on your own, then I think you'll be happy to make that compromise. To get nice and up close and personal, I am really impressed with the design on the Galaxy S5. Actually, removing this backplate, I'm more impressed than I thought I would be in just how compact Samsung has managed to cram all of these internals. So what we have here is a stacked micro SD card and micro SIM card slot so that it doesn't have to take up any more space on the PCB. They're right on top of each other. And this does use a micro SIM instead of the more current nano SIM. So I'm actually pretty happy about that because my personal SIM card is a micro SIM. So a lot of you guys out there who just want to pop in a SIM card and go, you don't have to worry about swapping your SIM over. But it's really exciting to see how compact they've made this assembly, as Samsung still allows you to swap in a micro SD card so you can expand storage. A lot of other phones have gone to built-in storage, and a number of them are claiming space saving. But we can see that there are still solutions for allowing us to slot in more memory via micro SD card without taking up a tremendous amount of space. So we've got the power button on the right thumb if you hold your phone right-handed. And that means that the volume rocker does a pretty good job of lining up with your index finger, if you hold your phone right-handed, of course. And down at the bottom, we've got our dedicated hardware home button, which also has a fingerprint scanner built into it. We'll dig into that in just a little bit. And down at the bottom, I know a lot of you are going to be excited about this little flap here, which protects a micro USB 3 port. This is going to be super fast for connecting peripherals like mass storage, but then this little flap also gives the phone that little bit of waterproofing. It's not a waterproof device. Oop, I'm going to get rid of that little plastic guard right there. It's not a waterproof device, but it is a water-resistant device. And so I'm happy to see companies like LG and Samsung addressing durability over the life of a 2-year contract. And for those of you who have ever splashed your phone and then had to get it serviced or get it replaced, this is a welcome addition. On the back, we've got the 16-megapixel shooter, which shoots 4K video with the little sensors right there and an LED flash. On top of the phone, we've got the headphone jack, and right there, if I'm shining the light on it properly, you can see the IR port. Again, I'm happy to see IR ports making a comeback, and using your phone as a universal remote is a fantastic feature, as I always have my phone with me and I never know where the remotes are. And just showing the boot up, this is a powered by Android Galaxy S5, no Tizen or Windows Phone here. We just want to do a little size comparison now. This is the Samsung Galaxy S5 with its 5.1-inch screen next to the Lumia 1020 with a 4.5-inch screen. You can see how much more real estate you get there. And next up, this is the Lumia Icon, also the same size as the Lumia 930, which should be released soon. And this is a 5-inch screen to the Samsung Galaxy S5's 5.1-inch screen. You can see it's actually pretty close. That 0.1 inch on the diagonal probably isn't going to make a tremendous amount of difference for screen real estate. And case in point that 1/10 of an inch on the diagonal isn't going to make a tremendous amount of difference, here is the LG G2. And as you can see, the 5.2-inch screen on the G2 doesn't really feel like it's that much bigger than the 5.1-inch screen on the Galaxy S5. So really, when we're getting into that kind of minutia, that kind of difference, it's not going to make a lot of impact on your day-to-day usage. But what will make a lot of difference is moving up into a 6-inch screen. And this is the Lumia 1520. This is a 6-inch screen on the diagonal compared to the Galaxy S5's 5.1-inch screen. And now you can see we're getting into some pretty heavy-duty mini tablet, phablet territory that is certainly going to give all of our flagship phones like the Galaxy S5 and the HTC Ones a serious run for their money in what you can display on the screen at any given time. Of all the flagship phones that I've used recently, the Galaxy S5, the G2, the Lumia Icon, the GS5 actually feels like the slimmest of all of these various devices. And for the first time in a long time, that's not just an illusion. This actually is one of the slimmest and sleekest phones on the market today. Now, between the GS5 and the LG G2, it's probably not going to be a huge difference. The Galaxy S5 is an 8.1 millimeter thick phone, whereas the LG G2 is an 8.9 millimeter thick phone. But it's remarkable just how much slimmer it feels compared to the Lumia Icon, which is a 9.8 millimeter thick phone. It definitely is the chunkiest of the flagship phones out recently. Now, this isn't a tremendously fat device. It just looks a little bit thicker, and then because of the corner edges, it's a little bit blockier. But when you hold it in the hand opposite the Galaxy S5, it's just a night and day difference what the hand feels like between these two phones. All right, taking a walk around the UI, we've got a very pretty TouchWiz lock screen here. You can kind of tap on the screen and get all these little bubble effects. And we have a quick launch to get to the camera, which is very helpful. It's not quite as fast as the quick launch for the iPhone. I still think the iPhone is one of the fastest camera apps I've ever used, but at least it's welcome as, Android phones don't have dedicated camera buttons, and I really wish they did. But once we're into this main screen, here is our TouchWiz UI. And it seems to be a little more influenced by what Google is doing with the Google Experience launcher, the Google Now launcher. But you can see we've got plenty of space here, and we can always do a little pinch move to see what various home screens we have set up, or if we want to get rid of a home screen, we can remove it just by sliding that up right there. We can add another one. We can always get into what widgets or wallpapers we want to use. Very clean, very nice setup, and it's super fluid. This is maybe the most fluid UI I've ever used on a Samsung phone. So the hardware built in, the Qualcomm 800 chipset that this phone is using is being used to great effect, because this is super clean, super fluid. Even getting into things like the gallery, where on the Galaxy S4, I always felt the gallery was a really long wait to get into. You tap on it, and it fires right up. This is incredible performance, and I'm really happy to see Samsung improve. And even just getting into the App Drawer, we can see how smooth and responsive this version of TouchWiz is. I'm very impressed. I'm not really a huge fan of manufacturer skins, and if I don't go stock, I usually go with something like Nova Launcher. And TouchWiz is doing a much better job of prettying up stock Android, these little transitions, these little animations, without bogging the phone down, taking up too many resources. And even getting into the quick toggles at the top of our notification tray, they've all been given just a little coat of polish, a slightly kinder and friendlier version of Android than what we were using in the early Android 4.0 days. Everything's sort of rounded and colorful and playful. Location now looks like the little markers that you find on map apps. Bluetooth toggles, power saving features, and we'll talk about the battery life on this in just a bit. Multi-window, because this can do split screen thanks to the resolution and the slightly larger screen size. And even getting into our proper settings, that aesthetic continues here. And I like this a lot better than the Galaxy S4 and older like other phones like the LG, where you have to toggle side to side for settings. This is far more efficient in just sort of laying everything out on the screen and then giving us a colorful little icon to tap to get into a specific feature or function. If we want to customize the notification panel, if we want to update the fingerprint settings, if we want to check out our data usage, connection and sharing features, sound and display features, all of these are far better laid out and organized than on any other Samsung, LG, or HTC that I've used over the past year. And I really like this setup. It looks a little, in fact, it looks a little sort of Symbian Nokia. But if they're going to rip off anybody, I'd appreciate them ripping off a company that's really good at modern design. So I really like this layout, and it makes the entire settings experience much, much nicer. Now, I don't love on this version of TouchWiz that when you slide past your leftmost home screen, you get this My Magazine setup where you can customize what type of information in news feeds and business and sports updates. It's Samsung's attempt at competing against services like BlinkFeed on the HTC One. I could just kind of wish that this was maybe a dedicated space for Google Now, as that's the kind of information that I like being fed to my phone or updated on my phone quickly, or just even just like a dedicated search space where I could get into searching what's on the phone and what's on the web. I think this is a nice feature. I just wish it wasn't tied to this left slide gesture. Yup, performance is screamingly fast. It's a funny position that Samsung finds themselves in when the LG G2, which came out at the end of last year, was already rocking a newer processor than the Galaxy S4. It meant Samsung actually had to play catch up to LG for their next flagship device, and I'm happy to see that they've risen to the occasion. The software optimizations in TouchWiz really help with that fluidity, that smooth UI performance, which sometimes can still stutter or lag on the G2. Now, you guys have heard me whine about this kind of stuff in the past. I am not a huge fan of manufacturer skins running on top of Android, and I'm shocked, personally that I'm about to say this about Samsung here, but the software optimizations built into the Galaxy S5 actually do help it feel like a nicer and more sophisticated experience than what I've had on the G2 and perhaps even the HTC One M7. Another area where Samsung has really stepped up their game is on the camera sensor. We can talk about megapixels all we want, but if you followed any of my videos in the past, you would know that megapixels mean nothing, and sensor size is really one of the most important criteria for determining how photographic our photos are and how cinematic our videos are. And Samsung in the Galaxy S5 has stepped up to a 1/2.6 inch on the diagonal sensor. And it's a really cumbersome way of saying it's bigger. So it's going to outpace the sensor built into the HTC One M8, and it brings it in line with Sony phones and the Nokia Lumia Icon and the Lumia 1520, though it's still a touch smaller than the sensor found in the Lumia 1020, so in your face. That extra sensor size really helps with aspects of photography like depth of field, how blurry and creamy your backgrounds get after you focused on your subject. And it brings that imaging performance really close to high-end point-and-shoot cameras, in my opinion, even besting the output of the Samsung Galaxy camera. I'll have a few street scene, outdoor, and real-world samples of camera performance in a separate video, so definitely be on the lookout for that. All right, and one of my favorite features of any phone to go over is, of course, the camera app, and I love this redesign that we started seeing with the Galaxy Note 3. It's just been further refined for the Galaxy S5. It's a very clean, very simple, very modern aesthetic, and it gets you into shooting photos and maximizes this beautiful 5.1-inch screen in a glorious way. We just don't have any of those old Samsung blocky controls that used to sort of take up all of our screen real estate. So now we've got a video button, a photo button. We can go into modes, and they're now just very simply organized down at the bottom. And it only starts you off with a couple modes. So you've got your beauty face if you want to sort of blur any of the soft focus effects, make sure you look nice and pretty. So we've got shot and more for burst mode effects. We've got a panorama mode. We've got virtual tour, which should be fun if you're like a real estate person. You can walk through places and it'll track those various photos to kind of give you a walking tour through photos. We've got dual camera capture so that you can actually be in the photo or video that you're shooting. And then thankfully, instead of having a carousel of different fireworks mode and sport mode and snowboarding mode and sitting at the beach with a Mai Tai mode, we've got the ability to download from the Samsung store more camera filters, sort of like the lens setup on a Windows phone. And so now we can see all of these different, sound and shot. If you want to have like a little voice memo, you can do sports shot, surround shot, animated photo. And then they also have paid filters, which they actually don't have any paid filters, but there will be a place for paid filters, especially if third-party developers want to add to the camera setup. And on the left-hand side, we've got controls to switch to the front-facing camera. So we can switch to the front-facing camera, and I'll wave, hey, that's me on the front-facing camera. We can go back. So if I tap this, it now goes into, let me tap it back on, a selective focus mode. And the selective focus mode actually works really well so long as you can apply the right distance. You have to be about 1.5 feet away from your subject, and then your background has to be way farther away. And it'll do this really nice selective focus where it'll focus on your subject and then blur out the rest of the background. It actually works really well. But when you disable selective focus, you can also do things like turn on HDR mode if you want to do an HDR photo. And you can use these as quick toggles for commonly used features on the camera. Hitting this gear, we now get more options to play with, some really photographic controls for a Samsung camera. Usually they try and make it a little bit more like a point and shoot. We can toggle HDR, we can set our timer, we can hit the flash, the various effects that we can play with. So these are like your Instagram filters. If you want to pre-color the shot, you can see it in real time. So if I hit fisheye, you can see how it turns it into a spherical look at whatever it is that I'm pointing the camera at, which is pretty sweet. And just like in our modes, we will eventually be able to download more effects depending on what developers are out there supporting this camera app. The audio zoom works well, but it doesn't have quite the same noise reduction as, say, a Nokia like the Icon or the 1520. We can toggle video stabilization, and I don't know why I had it off there. You should pretty much never turn off video stabilization. With this recording mode, we can set limits if we want to do fast or slow motion. We can also toggle resolution. So now we can shoot in full HD or in 4K, 3840 by 2160 for super high detailed video right there. I'm going to have another video out with just some samples from the camera shooting at 4K. The selective focus, which we talked about. We can do the tap to take pics, which is kind of nice. So now, instead of having to focus and then go and hit the shutter, you can tap, and as soon as it focuses, it's going to take a shot right there. And I actually like using my camera that way better than just using the dedicated shutter button. We can also change our metering modes, and this changes how the camera analyzes the light in the scene. So if you hit the spot, it's going to focus on wherever you focus the camera to determine what the exposure is for the photo or video that you're taking. So I like to leave it on spot. We can turn on face detection, picture stabilization, that should always be on too. Burst shots, which is pretty sweet. I'll show you that in a second. And then of course what our resolution and picture size is. So on a 16:9, 16 megapixel image. And then let's see how fast the burst mode is. Oh, I'm gonna turn off tap to take a picture just to pre-focus. We're gonna hit that. And now let's see how fast this burst mode is. Okay, so there's a 30-shot limit, and there's a little bit of a lag getting into the burst, but then it takes those 30 shots pretty dang quick. I would imagine that was about 10 frames per second. So it doesn't quite have the speed or the buffer size of the iPhone 5S. The iPhone 5S does beat the Galaxy S5 in terms of pure speed and the number of photos that you can take while going into a burst. I did a 90-shot burst on the iPhone 5S, and this sort of maxes you out at 30. But it is also capturing twice the resolution of the iPhone per shot, as the iPhone only has an 8-megapixel camera, and that was a 30-frame burst, 16 megapixel images, so that's pretty impressive. All in all, I love this evolution of the Samsung camera app, especially after having used the Galaxy camera and the Galaxy S4 Zoom, which are just way too busy, in my opinion, have way too much stuff going on screen for when you're actually trying to focus on what it is that you're taking a picture or video of. This is remarkably clean, and it's so much easier to use. This is a welcome improvement over the Galaxy S4, and it's a tremendous improvement over a number of Samsung's previous experimental hybrid cameras. For those of you who might be into that sort of thing, the front-facing camera on the Galaxy S5 is one of the best that I've used to date, shooting a very high-quality 1080p video for web chat, Skype calling, Google Plus Hangouts. Plus, for those of you who like to shoot selfies, the beauty face feature is automatically turned on whenever you activate the front-facing camera, so you can sort of blur out and soft focus all of those facial details, make sure you look nice and pristine, almost like a plastic doll when you go in for your duck face. The fingerprint scanner does a pretty good job of unlocking the phone. It's one simple swipe right there, and you go through a really easy registration process. So if we come in here, I'll register another phone. It makes you go through a series of swipes to register. So I'm gonna do that, recognize there. And you can register up to 3 fingerprints, good to know. We're gonna add another one. And I'm gonna say don't show that again, but that's just telling me that it needs to actually save pictures of my fingerprint for it to register. And now you have to go through a series of swipes. So I'm gonna hit that. Oh, I'm gonna swipe the entire pad. 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Oh, I almost, come on. 8. And now we've got 2 fingerprints registered. I can go home. I can turn the screen off. I've got it set to use as my lock screen. We're going to turn it back on. And now I can swipe that. It's recognized, and I'm back into the phone. It's a nice little security feature. It's definitely, I think it's easier than typing in an alphanumeric password, but I think most people will probably still go with some sort of simple pattern unlock or 4-digit PIN. Just to make sure that you can get into your phone no matter what hand you're holding it in, if you want to go one-handed. It's maybe my primary criticism of the fingerprint scanners when you're trying to use the phone one-handed. It's kind of a reach to get your thumb down to the bottom of the screen while still holding the phone safely. I end up sort of cradling it on the pad of my hand and the very tips of my fingers to be able to reach down that low. And then it's still a swipe gesture to unlock the phone. The fingerprint scanner basically dictates that you have to use 2 hands to unlock the device. So if I hit that, I can't really slide very easily down at the bottom. I have to hold it, unlock it, unlock it, now it's recognized, and I'm back into the phone. To that end, I really wish the fingerprint scanner was just sort of an imaging sensor that you could just hold your thumb or a finger down at the bottom to unlock the device, as opposed to it needing that gesture, that swipe. Oops. That I think one of the things that Apple did really well with their fingerprint scanner is that you just sort of push that button, hold your thumb there for a second, and it lets you in, as opposed to needing to move things around or to slide things up and down. I really wish that, if we were going to be entering an age of biometric security based on our fingerprints, that Samsung would have paid homage to that setup instead. And I think for a lot of people, this fingerprint scanner is probably going to be something that they use a couple times, and then I think a lot of people are going to end up going back to a pattern unlock, because it's a lot easier to do a pattern on the screen to unlock the phone, or even a simple alphanumeric password or 4-digit PIN to get into the phone when you're out and about, because anytime you have to use the phone two-handed, it sort of stops everything else that you're doing, and it forces you to focus exclusively on what you're doing with the phone in your hands in that moment, as opposed to being able to hit a power button or hit the home button and then just open the phone up with a gesture on the screen. One thing I don't like about the way that Samsung has set up their own proprietary apps, thankfully there are fewer services which compete against Google dedicated apps and services, but when something like S Health, for example, when you want to update that, it doesn't take you to Google Play, it takes you to a standalone Samsung app store or app experience. And I don't know why that makes me squirrely, and it's maybe even not fair that I'm bringing this up as a criticism, but I would rather not have multiple accounts and multiple payment systems to do things like download apps and services. Like, I've even stopped using the Amazon App Store on my Android devices just because I don't like having all of this extra stuff sort of running and keeping my personal information in the background. But so I'm going to be showing something on S Health, and there's an update for S Health, so now I'm in the Samsung store, so we're going to update this now. I gotta say, the heart rate monitor on the Galaxy S5 is a really cool idea, and I'm not really sure how many people are really gonna get into it, but if you've been using your phone to help track fitness, if you've been using your phone to keep track of your diet and exercise, having something like that is actually pretty handy, especially considering the waterproofing on the Galaxy S5 means that it should be a little bit more sweat resistant if you want to take it with you on a workout that's really gross. So here, I'm gonna hit this heart rate monitor here. I've been running around like crazy, so I'm probably a little high. I'm gonna hit OK, and let's see. Yeah, 112, I need to get that checked. But you can see it does a pretty good job of sort of scanning. You just want to keep still, you want to keep quiet, and then it gives you an update as to what your heart rate is. And so this is definitely something that, especially for me, I've been trying to get a little bit better about working out on a regular basis, eating right, doing all that fun stuff, especially since I spend most days sitting in front of a computer screen all day. I want to make sure that I don't get too big. I'm trying to find a diplomatic way of saying that. But tools like this actually do a pretty good job of helping you, as this appification, gamification of our daily lives and our ability to track our health and personal information are pretty cool. I do believe that Samsung is missing out on a valuable marketing opportunity in talking about the speaker on the back of their phone. Now, it's not going to win any awards against the HTC One in terms of quality, but in my experiences, and if you go through some of my other videos, you'll see that the Galaxy S5 speaker is actually just a touch louder than the HTC One M7. I would test it against the HTC One M8, but HTC hasn't sent me one of those to review, probably because they're afraid of my in-depth photo, video, and speaker tests. They're probably just afraid that they can't hang. That's probably the problem. Another subtle tweak that I'm really enjoying is how bright this screen gets. AMOLED screens in the past weren't known for their outdoor readability. They were high contrast screens, so that helped, but they weren't the brightest screens. That was usually reserved for high performance LCDs. And the Galaxy S5 actually hangs really well with the Lumia icon, which is one of the brightest smartphone screens I've ever used. So whatever secret sauce or magic voodoo that Samsung has sprinkled into this display is allowing the Galaxy S5 to compete with the brightest of the bright. Battery life has been phenomenal. Now, I'm only a couple days into using the Galaxy S5, but it's already become a 2-day phone. As I mentioned before, it gives up a little bit of battery capacity to the LG G2. The G2 has a 3000 milliamp hour battery cell, and the Galaxy S5 has a 2800 milliamp hour battery cell, but the power management features on the Galaxy S5 are formidable. So unless you're doing a lot of max screen brightness 3D gaming, like really intense, Riptide style games, This thing is going to hang with you for an entire day, an entire night, and most of the next day, no problems at all. Plus, the Qualcomm chipset built into this thing supports that quick charge feature, which means if you get this connected to a 2-amp charger, it's going to juice up your phone pretty quick. And for my subscribers, if there are specific battery tests that you'd like to see me run, I definitely appreciate some suggestions. These phones are becoming such long runtime devices that it's getting harder and harder to meaningfully test battery life. Like, do I stream a bunch of movies on Wi-Fi, or do I just use it under normal circumstances, syncing all of my email and social media accounts? Drop me some suggestions below, because I'd really like to hear how I could better test things like battery life for you guys out there. I would really appreciate your suggestions. And it simply cannot be overstated how appreciative I am of companies like LG and Samsung addressing durability. The fact that the Galaxy S5 is somewhat waterproofed. It could probably even survive being completely dunked in water. I'm not going to test that because I'm not that brave. But it really helps lend that little bit of extra confidence that I'm investing in a platform, or I'm investing in a brand, and that my investment will probably, or more likely, survive my 2-year contract. So ultimately, where does that leave us? We've got the Galaxy S5. And before it was actually released out into the ecosystem or available for purchase, it got panned for not being exciting enough. It wasn't enough of a departure. It wasn't enough newness built into it on top of the Galaxy S4. And I have to say, this is the same experience that I ran into with the Galaxy S4. After how revolutionary and how formative the Galaxy S3 was, the Galaxy S4 felt like kind of a letdown until I got it in my hand and I played with it for a little while. I'm feeling the same way about the Galaxy S5. Like I said before, I think smartphones are starting to hit that maturity, that plateau. This experience of staring at a large slab of glass is getting to be about as good as it can get. So we're really looking at iteration, not revolution, for future phone updates. But every single little tweak and just the incredible attention to detail that Samsung has poured into making this phone make it much better, in my opinion, than the sum of its parts. Samsung has managed to address almost every single criticism and complaint I had with the Galaxy S4 and created a phone which now stands opposite the LG G2 and the Lumia Icon as being one of the most powerful flagship devices on the market today. It's obviously way too early to declare it a phone of the year, but it's certainly a contender. After my past reservations and some of my other videos, it's maybe the highest compliment I can pay the Galaxy S5 is that it's a lot better than I thought it was going to be. As always, folks, thanks so much for watching my videos, sharing my videos. You guys have been awesome getting on the social media and sharing, subscribing to my channel, and leaving me comments down at the bottom. That really helps sort of flesh out what I'm going to do for future topics and discussions and answering questions. It's definitely one of the things that I love about getting into discussions with you guys and getting into some of those fun debates. As always, folks, thanks so much for watching, and I will catch you all on the next review.